Welcome, travelers, champions, heroes, and villains, to the adventure. Last we left off, we completed the entirety of the tutorial colors, last of which being blue, my least favorite, although it's fun when I splash in other decks like blue and green or blue and black, I love. Sometimes red. But while we were away, I went and found a bunch of free codes, which are down in the description on different sites. So we get a bunch of free packs and such. I think we got some extra gold as well to purchase a few more packs. So we're still on the free-to-play game, but might as well get some free packs and open them up together. We got from Theros, we got Sweet Oblivion. Target player mills 4 cards. Escape. You may cast this card from your graveyard for its escape cost, so 1 blue and 3 colorless. We can exile 4 other cards from our graveyard, and we can play that again. It doesn't exile, so we can keep doing it over and over and over again. It's interesting. 1 with the stars. Enchant creature permanent. Enchanted permanent is an enchantment and loses all other card types. So, you can play that to get around a few other things, or to make it an enchantment to disenchantment, or if you make it an enchantment but it no longer becomes a creature, I don't believe it can attack you anymore. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm like 95% sure. Thaumaturgus Familiar. You get a 1/3 flying bird that scries 1. Scrying means you get a look at the top card of your deck, and you can either put it back there or at the bottom of your deck. So if you need like a very specific card, or if you've got like a billion lands, you want to look at that card and be like, hey, this is trash, I need to get rid of it. Very useful. Heliod's Pilgrim. When Heliod's Pilgrim enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an aura card, reveal it, put it in your hand, and then shuffle. That's pretty great. Especially if you're playing like an enchantment-y style deck where you need very specific creature enchantments, such as 1 with the stars. Nelea's Forerunner. An enchantment and a creature. And it's 5/3 trample. Other creatures you control have trample. So, gives everybody on your field trample, which is useful for green. It's got weak toughness, so it's probably not going to stay around for very long. Plus, it's 3 toughness, which is kind of sketchy. Sometimes 3 is good, sometimes it's not as good, depending upon what matchups you're doing. But it is what it is. I mean, these are mostly common cards. You can tell by the symbol in the middle, where it says enchantment creature beast, there's a little face symbol there. It's black, that means it's common. These ones are silver, that means they're uncommon, and this one will probably be rare, which is gold, or I believe mythic rare is red. It didn't used to be mythic rares, but wizards needed money. Hero of the Games. 3/2 creature, where whenever you cast a spell that targets hero games, creatures you control get +1/+0 till end of turn. So if you have like a big board and you cast a bunch of stuff to boost up your hero of the games, he's going to boost up all your other creatures, and you go charging in. Glory Bearers. Enchantment creature, human cleric. Whenever another creature you control attacks, it gets +0/+1 until end of turn. So it makes your attackers a little hardier, which can be useful. We got the Acroan War. It's a saga enchantment. So it starts off with when you cast it, after the saga enters in, or after you draw your draw step, add a lore counter and then sacrifice it after 3. So when you first cast it, you gain control of target creature as long as the Acroan War remains on the battlefield. And the next turn, you get until your next turn, creatures your opponent control attack each combated fable. Which sounds weird when you first consider that, but having your opponents have to attack with all their creatures means like even their wussy creatures that they normally wouldn't want to attack with, they have to attack with all of them, so you can block and kill most of their stuff depending upon what your setup is. And 3, each tapped creature deals damage to itself equal to its power, so they will be attacking, so unless they don't tap to attack on the next turn, they will be tapped, and whatever survived would hopefully kill itself. But keep in mind that says each, not opponents, so it will affect your own as well. Let's keep going. I hope you guys enjoy hearing me explain some stuff. I know a lot of you probably already know what these cards do or the basics of it. This is just I guess since we started with a tutorial, I'm kind of going to give you my insight on some stuff. And if you don't like it, feel free to skip ahead. This is probably going to be the majority of the video. We got one with the stars. We already had that. We got a Scoffos Maze Warden, a Minotaur Warrior. I was looking at that really weird. I thought he was wearing a big... I thought the horns were his helmet for some reason. But he is one colorless to give him +1/-1 until end of turn. Whenever another creature becomes the target of an ability of a land you control named Labyrinth of Scoffos, you may have Maze Warden fight that creature. I assume that's a fight land? I honestly don't know. But the good thing about that is you can use this ability at any time, so once blockers are declared and he's declared unblocked, you could totally pump him up 3 times and make him 6/1 and not have to worry about him dying. So, it's useful. Plus it's colorless land, so if you put him in a multicolored deck, it's useful. We have Aspect of the Manticore, or Aspect of Manticore, know the. Enchantment. Enchant creature, has flash, so you can play it anytime you could in instant. You can see all the extra explanations of the card abilities off to the right, which is nice that it does that. When Aspect of the Manticore enters the battlefield, enchanted creature gains first strike until end of turn, and enchanted creature gets 2/2/0 till forever. So you can throw it down real quick and give your creature first strike, make it live, and make it bigger. Quite useful. It's kind of expensive, but it's a common card. Common cards are usually not as powerful as the rares and uncommons are, but occasionally you find amazing commons that synergize very well with whatever deck you're making. Or if you're on the free-to-play plan, then sometimes this is the route you go, because you don't want to spend $1 billion. And Magic can eat your money real quick. You got a Brine Giant. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each enchantment you control, so if you have a whole bunch of enchantments, keep in mind, like, creatures that are also enchantments, like the Eidolon of Philosophy here, also would count. Just every enchantment. We'll reduce it by 1, so it could technically just cost 1 blue for a 5/6. Pretty useful. And the Eidolon of Philosophy, the enchantment creature spirit, 1 for a 1/2, which is always nice. You want to at least... If you can ever find something that gives you more power and more toughness than what you're paying for it in general, so like 1 for a 2/2 or a 2/1 or a 1/2 is always kind of nice. Plus, if it sticks around and you draw it late enough, you can sacrifice it for a ton of mana to draw 3 cards. Pretty decent, in my opinion. Glory Bearers, we've already seen that. And Nylea's Forerunner, we've already seen that one as well. We got Atris, Oracle of Half-Truths, black and blue, one of the colors I said I'd like combining together. Menace means that you have to use at least 2 creatures to block it, so if they only have 1 creature on the field, you can just attack without worrying about being blocked at all. He's a legendary creature, which legendary is a specific tag. It applies to just about like everything. There's legendary creatures, enchantments, lands, everything. It means that there can only be 1 copy of this card on your side of the field at any given time. If you play another Atris, you will choose whether the one already on the field gets destroyed immediately or the one you cast gets destroyed. Sometimes there's points to doing that, sometimes there's not. This is, I believe, the current Legend rule. They've gone through many original ones. When it first came into play, when Legends first existed, the first one on the field existed and any others instantly died upon being cast. So if you were the first one to cast a very powerful Legend, you just had carte blanche over it. But I believe that's the current Legend rule. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry, but I do believe that is it. Anyways, when Atris, Oracle of Half-Truths, enters the battlefield, target opponent looks at the top 3 cards of your library and separates them into a face-down pile and a face-up pile. Put 1 pile in your hand and the other into your graveyard. So it's kind of like a risk-reward thing. They get to choose which ones you see, which ones you don't, so maybe you really need that face-up card and you should take it. Maybe they put a half-decent card face-up and the other 2 cards that are face-down are lands. And you might get baited into choosing that, but it's card advantage in a certain degree. Open up another pack. We got some extra wild cards, which is nice. We got a Glimpse of Freedom, which is an instant to draw a card, and For 1 blue and 2 colorless, you can exile 5 other cards in your graveyard and draw another card. That can be pretty useful, in all honesty. Drawing cards is always nice, and especially if you're not doing anything with your graveyard, having repeatable card draw that you can do over the course of the game is pretty nice. Traveler's Amulet. Sacrifice Traveler's Amulet. Search your library for basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, and shuffle. It's okay. It helps you find land. Fixes land if you're playing a multicolor deck. It's fine. Scoffos War Leader. That's actually a really cool picture. Stop disappearing. There we go. Sacrifice another creature or an enchantment, and Scoffos War Leader gains +1/+0 and gains menace until end of turn. That's a hefty investment for making it a 5/5 and menace. I mean, I can see a case where it would work, but that sounds more of like a drafty type thing, which we will talk about later. Ichthyomorphosis. There's a big old gross looking fish. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature loses all abilities and is a blue fish with base power and toughness 0/1. So those 10/10 green dinosaurs that we have, hey, for 1 blue and 2 colorless, that 10/10 is now a 0/1 with no abilities. So if you have like a creature on the field too that just has, it's usually really weak, but it has outstanding abilities, you can be like, no, sucks to your abilities. Pretty decent. Blue doesn't have the best ways to get rid of things, but it's not a bad card in general. It's slightly expensive, but whatever. Karametra's Blessing. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. If it's an enchanted creature or an enchantment creature, it also gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So it can't die, and your opponents can't target it. That's pretty nifty. Quite nice. I like the elk there. It's got the nice little constellations. And we got the Shadow Spear for our card. Just seeing all the abilities just scrolling on the side there. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has trample and has lifelink. So trample, we know what that does. You overkill into your opponent. Lifelink for each point of damage that creature does, you gain that much life. And for 1 colorless permanents, your opponent's control lose hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. That's pretty nifty. So if you've got a bunch your creature or opponent playing a deck where you can't really target our stuff or all of our stuff is indestructible, you can pretty much just say, yeah. Kind of niche, but not bad. I mean, it costs 1 to bring out and to equip, so it's not bad. Equipment, sorry, I didn't explain that, is kind of like an enchantment, except for it's an artifact. You pay the equip cost and you put it on your creature like you would an enchantment. However, if your creature dies, instead of that going to the graveyard as well, they just kind of drop their weapon or gear, their equipment, as it were, back onto your field, and you can equip it again and again and again and again. It's like a reusable enchantment that doesn't go to your graveyard. They have to specifically kill the artifact with artifact destruction or some other way to get rid of it. Your character will just drop it otherwise. And go into Ikoria, Lair of Behemoths. We get a Zagoth Crystal. It's 3 for an artifact that can tap for a black, a green, or a blue, and has cycling. Cycling is you can pay 2, or whatever its cost for cycling is, to discard that card to draw a card. Very useful if you, later in the game, say you draw this card and you already have a ton of land. It's not going to do you any good. You can pay 2 to discard it, draw a card, hopefully get something better. You can also do that at an instant speed. You can do that whenever you want to on your opponent's turn, at the end of your turn, before your turn. So you can say your opponent plays something crazy and you really need like the murder card or counterspell or something like that, and you don't have it. And if you can't do that, then you're going to lose the game. You might as well cycle it and see what you can do. Skull Prophet. Black and green for 3/1. Tap to add. Jeez. Calm the tunes down there, game. You can tap for either a black or a green, kind of like a little mana elf, or tap to mill 2 cards. And it looks like it can be either player, or it's possibly yourself. Probably yourself only. Because it doesn't say target player, so I assume it's just yourself. So that's more for decks that like to recycle their graveyard, like, oh, I need ditch a bunch of stuff with my library into my graveyard so I can reanimate it for far cheaper than the actual casting cost. Those kinds of things. Very specific deck. Humble Naturalist. Add 1 mana of any color. Spend this mana only to cast creature spells. So, green does like to generate fast mana of any color. Outstanding. But you can only use it to cast creature spells, which is a thing, but green mostly is just casting creatures. So, just keep that in mind. If you play it, you can only use it to cast your creatures. Facet Reader. 1 and tap it to draw a card, then discard a card. Kind of like cycling. But you get to draw the card before you discard it, so you can draw and see if it was garbage to chuck it. But if you have no cards in hand, you're like, haha, I'm going to draw a card. You pretty much draw it and instantly discard it, whatever it is. It might work for you that way. Not a bad card. It's called, essentially it's referred to as a looting effect. You draw and discard. So if you hear anybody call it that, that's usually what they mean. Blood Curdle. It's also a cool picture. Destroy target creature. Put a menace counter on target creature you control. Menace is pretty much like an enchantment, except for it's a counter. So it just means whatever creature you want has menace from now on, so it can only be blocked by 2 or more creatures. Evolving Wilds. It's a land, so you can only play it once your turn, but you can sacrifice it to find a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So it helps with multicolored card decks, or even single color card decks if you're really like needing to thin out your deck because you can play this land, sacrifice it to get another land, so you're essentially drawing 2 lands out of your deck. However, it does bring it into play tapped, so it's not going to be useful that turn, but that's the purpose of it. Perimeter Sergeant. Whenever Perimeter Sergeant attacks, other humans you control get +1/+0 till end of turn, so anything that has a creature human, it doesn't matter if it's human something else, as long as it says human somewhere in the creature text, it will get +1/+0 till end of turn. Oh, guess we should see what we got. We got a Kahira, the Orphan Guard. Legendary creature, a cat beast. It is a companion which came out in the Ikora layer of beasts. It has been errated already, but it has a requirement, so in order to be your companion, not to have it in your deck, just to be considered your companion, each creature card in your starting deck is a cat, elemental, nightmare, dinosaur, or beast card. So you have a very specific amount of creatures, and then it can be your companion. If you don't want it to be your companion, you can just stick it in your deck. Does not matter. It has vigilance, so it doesn't tap to attack. Each other creature you control that's a cat, elemental, nightmare, dinosaur, or beast gets +1/+1 and has vigilance. Keep in mind it does say other, so it does not grant that benefit to itself. But companions are, if your starting deck meets that restrictions, you may choose it to be your companion. You can only have 1 companion. Once per game, you can pay 3 colorless, and it essentially goes from exile or a companion zone and into your hand. When they first came out, they just were there. So lots of people were just like, they're mandatory because it's 1 extra card you get for free at the beginning of the game. So they put a cost to it because it was powerful. So what else we got? This is also the one I believe that had like the Godzilla stuff and all the cool monsters in it. Heartless Act. Choose 1. Destroy target creature with no counters on it, or remove up to 3 counters from target creature. So, most things don't have counters on them. Counters are anything from those menace counters to +1/+1 counters to -1/-1 counters, or anything else that says counter. So if it has any counters on it whatsoever, you cannot destroy it, but you can also remove counters from target creature. Keep in mind that doesn't necessarily mean you have to use it on your opponent's creature. I said they're like -1/-1 counters, so somebody could be slowly like destroying one of your creatures. You could remove 3 of those counters from your creature to make it stronger. It's also at instant speed, so very niche situations, but you could totally sneak in the kill. A Parcel Beast. Green and blue. 2/4. 1 and tap. Look at the top card of your library. If it's a land card, you may put it onto the battlefield. If you don't put that card onto the battlefield, you can put it into your hand. So it lets you draw cards, which is great. It lets you put them onto the battlefield if it's a land. Extra great, because that means it doesn't count as your 1 land a turn, so you can be pumping out more than 1. Mutate was also a ability that was added in the Ikora Mutate. If you cast a spell for its mutate cost, so if you just pay 1 green and 1 blue, you can put it under or over target non-human. So if it has human in the title at all, it cannot be mutated. They mutate into the creature on top plus all abilities underneath it. So if you put it on top, that's the power and toughness it has. If you put it below it, the creature just gains the abilities of this. So if you just want to make this gigantic mutated pile that has like 30 different abilities, cool. If you need this to be the strongest power and toughness, you can put it on top. It's an alternate way to kind of push things out. Anywho, get the Rumbling Rock Slide, a sorcery, so you can only cast that on your turn during your main phases. Not during combat, not during your upkeep, only during your main phases. Rumbling Rock Slide deals damage to target creature equal to the number of lands you control. All lands, regardless of color, if they are basic or not. So, pretty much throwing a big ol' hunk of earth at a creature to off it. It's pretty expensive for damage spells, but it's pretty much a guaranteed kill at the same time. Especially for 4 mana. Divine Arrow, 1 white, 1 colorless for an instant. Divine Arrow deals 4 damage to target attacking or blocking creature, so you can do it to something that's blocking your creature or a creature that's attacking you. Pretty useful. Heliod Glider, that is outstanding. It's terrifying looking. It's a Nightmare Squirrel. Nightmare indeed. Heliod Glider enters the battlefield with your choice of a flying counter or a first strike counter on it, so it can either be flying or first striking. Pretty cool. Plus that's a counter, so Heartless Act wouldn't work on it. Wingfold Terran. Wingfold Terran enters the battlefield with your choice of a flying counter or hexproof counter on it. Kind of weird to see it walking around, but yeah. And we get the Aegis Turtle. 1 for a 0/5 turtle. Not bad. It's kind of like a wall, except for you can eventually buff it up or mutate on top of it. Or below it, if you just want to have a very tough creature that's pulling lands and cards out of your deck. Either way, let's see what we got. We got a Crystalline Giant. It's outstanding artwork. Wizards of the Coast has done a fantastic job with their art as the years have gone on. Artifact Creature Giant. At the beginning of combat on your turn, choose a kind of counter at random that it doesn't have on each among flying, first strike, death touch, hexproof, lifelink, menace, reach, trample, vigilance, and +1/+1. Put a counter of that kind on Crystalline Giant. So, at the beginning of each of your combats, it gets stronger and stronger, essentially. Until it is a flying, first striking, death touching, hexproof, lifelinking, menace, reaching, trampling, vigilance, 4/4. That's just pounding through. It's going to take a lot of turns to get there, but if you have a way to take extra turns, you'll figure it out. Let's open up our last pack of Ikora. We got a wild card. We also filled up our other wild card things. We got the different colored crystal. Oh, wait. Is that the same color? Either way, we know what it does. Valiant Rescuer. Creature Human Soldier. Whenever you cycle another card for the first time each turn, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. So it says each turn the first time. So if you do it more than once in your turn, you just get it the first time. However, it doesn't say only your turn. So you cycle something on your turn, you get a 1/1. You cycle something on your opponent's turn, you get a 1/1. Back to your turn, another 1/1. You can cycle through and make a hefty army pretty quickly. Blazing Volley deals 1 damage to each creature your opponents control, which is fantastic. Doesn't screw over your creatures and kills off a bunch of little 1/1s or things with just 1/1 toughness. So if you're making a bunch of tokens for 1 red, you've just annihilated their whole board. Coordinated Charge. Creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. So that is all creatures. So if you have a big old board, say with a bunch of tokens, they got really huge, you get in there, smack. Spring Jaw Trap. 1, it's flash, so you can cast anytime with an instant. 4 tap, sacrifice it, so sacrifice means you kill it. And it deals 3 damage to any target. So that can be a player, that can be a creature, anything that can take damage. And Convolute. Counter... Excuse me, throat just got hella dry. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 4 colorless. So if they don't have 4 lands on tap, that spell's just going to be countered. Or if they really, really need it, you can slow them down so they can't play another card that turn. it's mostly for earlier stuff, but 4 extra lands is hard for people to always have up. Ooh, we got a wild card rare. Fantastic, so it can be whatever we want. To the core 2021. We got a Volcanic Geyser. Deals X damage to any target, so X can be any amount of land you want to spend, including 0. So 2 red and an X. And it will do X amount of damage to any one target you choose. It can be a player, so if you just have a billion land at the end of the game, you can throw a big old geyser at your opponent's face and kill him, or annihilate a gigantic creature. Gormund, a demon, is an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice a creature, so if you don't sacrifice a creature, you can't play him. Flying, trample, so he both flies and has trample. When he enters the battlefield, each opponent also sacrifices a creature. So you have to sacrifice a creature, but your opponents have to sacrifice a creature, and then you got a 5/5 flyer on the board just wreaking havoc. Very nice. Hobble Fiend. It's surprisingly cute. Is that weird? 2/1 trample, but you can sacrifice another creature to put a +1/+1 counter on it. You can do that anytime you have an instant, so say somebody casts their Volcanic Geyser on one of your other creatures, you can pay 1 to sacrifice it to make your creature bigger. They don't get to choose a different target, so they sort of wasted their spell, but it still has the same intended effect of, killing your creature, except for you get a little benefit of it dying. And it's got trample, so eventually it could get gigantic. Igneous Cur. Has a little bit of slight fire breathing. 1 red, 1 colorless. It gets +2/+0 till end of turn. You can do it as much as you want, so you can make it gigantic. Have lots of fun. Makeshift Battalion. Whenever Makeshift Battalion and at least 2 other creatures attack, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So again, always look for the word other. So it needs to be Makeshift Battalion and 2 more creatures attacking in order for the +1/+1 counter to happen, not just the Makeshift Battalion and another creature. That would not satisfy the requirements, and you'll just be annoyed that you didn't get the counter. Cancel counter target spell. This is any spell in the game. Everything except for lands in the game are spells. Artifacts as they're being cast are spells. Creatures are spells as they're being cast. Everything as you cast it is a spell. So when somebody casts anything that really ticks you off, you can just be like, no. Even if it has protection from blue. Normally a protection spell will make sure that it's safe from that color. However, it does not have that ability until it makes it into play. So you can totally counterspell it before then. The only way you can't is if the card specifically says cannot be countered, which is how you get around the stupid blue annoying counterspelly junk. Spined Megalodon. Little shark. Expensive shark at 7 lands for 5/7 hexproof. Whenever Spined Megalodon attacks, scry for 1. It's a card. Sublime Epiphany. It's some Alice in Wonderland shit right there. For 6 mana, it's an instant and you choose 1 or more, so you could technically choose everything. Or just the 1. Counter target spell. We already described what a spell is. Counter target activated or triggered ability. So that'd be things like the Hobble Fiend. Its ability right there, if sacrificing another creature, put a 1/1 counter on it, that is an activated or triggered ability. And return target non-land permanent to its owner hand. You could bounce back a creature, either yours, one of yours, or your opponent's. Create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, and target player draws a card. So for 6 land, you can do a smorgasbord of things. We've got the core 2021. We get a Tolarian Kraken. Whenever you draw cards, you may pay 1. When you do, you may tap or untap target creature. So that's things like that mutate beast that, could let you draw more cards and put lands into play. You could totally draw your card, pay 1, untap that creature, put it into play. You drew another card, because it's not just during your draw step, it's whenever you draw a card. Anything that makes you draw a card, you could pay to untap, and it costs a lot of land to make it work, but you could do it several times a turn. Skyway Sniper deals 1 damage to target creature with flying for 1 green 2. He also has reach, so can block things with flying. Very nice. Return to nature. Choose one and only one. Destroy an artifact, destroy an enchantment, or exile a card from a graveyard. Exile, whenever your stuff dies, it goes to the graveyard. Whether it's countered, blown up from damage, destroyed from some sort of destroy effect, it goes to your graveyard. Exile is a separate zone from your graveyard. It is essentially removed from the game. You can't get it back. You can look at it all you want to, but you really can't interact with it ever again. So, like all the things that are looking in your graveyard for stuff, that's why you want to exile certain things so they can't get it back from their graveyard. There are some ways as the game progressed that you can interact with your exile zone slightly, but those are few and far between. It's not a word. Opt 1 blue to scry 1 and draw a card. Since the scry is at the top, that means you do it first, so you get to look at the top card of your library and choose whether you want to draw that card, essentially, or toss it at the bottom of your deck and take another chance. Very useful card. Liliana's Steward. 1/2 zombie. Tap and sacrifice him. Target opponent discards a card. Activate only as a sorcery. So, whenever you don't need him anymore, you can tap and make an opponent discard a card, but only as a sorcery, so you can't do all the fun tricks like, oh, somebody lightning bolts it or something. You can't do it in response to them doing that. So, take it for what it is. Masked Blackguard. Flash, so you can cast this creature anytime you want to. The best times are at the end of your opponent's turn, so that when it becomes your turn, it will no longer be summoning sick and can attack right away. And you can pump it up like a bunch of the red creatures, except for it's relatively expensive to do so. But you can get some sneaky damage with it. Or some sneaky blocking. Anointed Chorister? I don't know. 1 for 1/1 lifelink, very nice, and you can pump them up till end of turn, which is nice as the game goes on. Gain more health as you increase the creature. And our rare is the Elder Gargaroth, and that one has the red tag, so that is a mythic rare. It is 6/6 for 5 mana. It has Vigilance, Reach, and Trample, so it doesn't tap to attack. It can block things with flying because it's gigantic, and it just tramples over things. And whenever he attacks or blocks, you get to either create a 3/3 Beast Creature token, which is the token right next to it with the pig with horns, essentially. You gain 3 life, or you draw a card. So either you need a bigger board, make more tokens, you're really low on health, you can gain more life, or you really need to refill your hand, you can draw more cards. Very useful card. And let's just keep on going. Keep going through the train. And apparently we've done enough packs to get some wild cards. We have 13 common wilds, 10 uncommons. I think each pack you open adds a notch to the little counter. Not entirely sure, wasn't paying attention. Leafkin Avenger. Excuse me, need water. I apologize. Leafkin Avenger is a multicolored card. It requires green and red mana to cast it, as well as 2 others. It is a 4/3 elemental druid that looks really pissed off. It has tap to add 1 green for each creature with power 4 or greater you control. He himself starts off with power 4 or greater, so he can at least tap for 1 green. Or you can pay 7 colorless and 1 red to have the Leafkin Avenger deal damage equal to its power to target player or planeswalker. So if you can pump him up a lot, you can just have him continually just smacking players or planeswalkers. We've seen the Masked Blackguard. We have a Wishcoin Crab, just a 2/5 crab. Valoria's Steed, a 3/3 Vigilance Horse that creates a Knight token that also has Vigilance. Tokens in this game tell you what they do on there. It's very nice. You don't need to play like in the real game where you throw down like pennies or other such. We have Grasp of Darkness, 2 black, and target creature gets -4 and -4 until end of turn. Very useful for just straight up killing a creature, but sometimes it can just lower a creature's power or toughness enough that one of your other creatures can block and kill it if it's strong enough. Keen Glide Master, 2/1, and target creature gains flying until end of turn, so you can give your whole team flying if you need to, or oddly, some of your opponent's creatures if you feel the need, like mixing it with that archer that can shoot down flying creatures. You can give your opponent's creatures flying and then shoot them down. There's always something you can do. It's really expensive and inefficient, but it's there. We get a Temple of Epiphany. It enters the battlefield tapped, and when it enters the battlefield, you can scry for 1. It can tap for either red or blue mana. It's a decent dual land. Nothing fantastic. Jeez. We're gonna jump on over to Kaladesh, because we only have 1 pack of that. Keep in mind, I got all these packs for free from just entering the codes, so as far as I know, they're all still active. Go enter them in, and you'll have the same amount of stuff we're opening here. Probably not the same cards, but the same amount of packs. Aetherborn Marauder. We have a 2/2 flying lifelink Aetherborn Rogue. When he enters the battlefield, move any number of 1/1 counters from other permanents you control onto itself. So it just kind of like sucks up all your +1/+1 counters if you want to. The unfortunate thing is that it says things you control, because if your opponent was also doing something like that, you could just absorb all their 1/1 counters and it'd be awesome. But it is what it is. Gearshift Ace. First strike whenever he crews a vehicle. We'll talk about vehicles if we see one. That vehicle gains first strike until end of turn. Fortuitous Fine. Choose one or both. Return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand, and return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So if you have an artifact or a creature in your graveyard, you can get one of them back. If you have an artifact and a creature, you can get them both back. If you have 2 artifact creatures in your deck, you could get them both back. Aviary Mechanic. When Aviary Mechanic enters the battlefield, you may return another permanent you control to its owner's hand. It could be one of your own or one of your opponents. You can see how the boomerang effects work. We've seen it when we played Blue decks. Nimble Innovator. When he enters the battlefield, draw a card. 2/2 for 4. Honestly, kind of crap. Fireforger's Puzzle Knot. When Fireforger's Puzzle Knot enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to any target. And you can sacrifice it to deal 1 damage to any target. So on the turn it comes into play, if you have an extra red and 2 colorless lying around, you could do 2 damage to something. Be an expensive 2 damage, but you could totally do it. And Aether Theorist. When Aether Theorist enters the battlefield, you get 3 energy. The little lightning bolt things are energy. It is a separate resource that nobody can interact with. It was only really in the Kaladesh cycle, and I'm pretty sure Wizards is never bringing it back because it was ungodly powerful. You can tap to pay 1 energy to scry 1. And we get the Inventor's Fair. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more artifacts, you gain 1 life. This is also a legendary land, so you can only have 1 of them in play. You can pay 4 and tap to sacrifice it to search your library for an artifact card. That could be any artifact, and it could have other things besides just the word artifact on it. Like it could be an artifact creature or the artifact equipment. Anything that has artifact in the title, like where it says creature, if it says artifact anywhere over there, you're good to grab it. And activate it only if you control 3 or 4 more artifacts. So, good card. Let's go back to Zendikar. Zendikar Rising. We've got common wild card. We got a Roiling Regrowth. Sacrifice a land. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards. And they just kept the epic music in the background again. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. So you're essentially giving up 1 land for 2 lands. You can refix your colors if you need to. You're essentially gaining 1 land out of the process. And there's a few other tricks you can do along with it. Pretty decent. Okay, game. We got it. We got the Tajuru Snarecaster. 1/4 reaching Elf Road. And this is Zendikon. An enchant land, so it has to go on a land. Enchanted land is a 4/4 elemental creature with reach and haste. It is still a land. When enchanted land dies, return that card to its owner's hand. Fantastic. So you got a 4/4 hasty creature, and when it dies, you essentially get the land back to your hand to recast it. You got Kozul's Fury. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature. Kozul's Fury deals damage equal to the sacrificed creature's power to any target. So it's an old school card called Flame. You're essentially grabbing one of your creatures and chucking it at either your opponent's face or a creature. Or, on the backside, this is a flip card. It is a land. A red source land that comes into play tapped. So, in this card, you can play it in either way, shape, or form. So it's essentially, you can either cast the Fury to sacrifice a creature, or if you need it, it will be a land. So, you can kind of do a little land fixing, or cheese the amount of lands you need in your deck in order for it to be efficient with these kinds of cards. You got the Farsight Adept, 3/3, enters the battlefield, you and target opponent each draw a card. Most often you're only fighting one opponent, but occasionally you can fight more than one. So you get a 3/3 and you're both going to draw a card. Cliffhaven Kite Sail, another equipment. When it enters the battlefield, attach it to target creature you control, so when you cast it, you essentially get to equip it to a creature for free. You can only equip things to your own creatures, though. I don't know if I mentioned that before. You giving a creature flying. Very useful. When they finally shoot it down or kill it, you can give them another one of your creatures flying. It's wonderful. And we got the Roiling Vortex. At the beginning, it's an enchantment, so it just chills on your field. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, it deals 1 damage to them. So that is all your opponents as well as you. Whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana was cast on that spell, Roiling Vortex deals 5 damage to that player. And 1 red, your opponent can't gain life this turn. This is a card designed to screw over life gaining or free casting cost decks. Very specific reasonings. You don't use it for every deck. Excuse me. Only for very specific matchups. You get the Bala Ged Recovery. Turn target card from your graveyard to your hand or land. We've seen the dual-sided card in the last one. The Demon's Disciple. When he enters the battlefield, each player, includes you and your opponent, sacrifices a creature or a planeswalker, so you can end up screwing yourself. Most often you want to do that so that you can get creatures in your graveyard, or just to make sure your opponent gets screwed for cheap. Cliffhaven Sellsword, 3/1. That's it. A Jiraga Visionary, a 3/2 Elf Wizard that gets to draw a card when it comes into play. Kind of expensive for that reason. Tuk Tuk Rubble Fort, a 0/3 Defender. Defenders are essentially walls, they can't attack. They almost never have any power, so that's how it happens, but it has reach, and it gives all your creatures haste, so the second you start playing your creatures, they can all attack that turn or use their abilities. That's kind of nice. Smite the Monstrous. Instant destroy target creature with power 4 or greater. I think we can all figure out why that's good. And a Lotus Cobra. It's a fancy picture. I think I like some of the other art for it, but it's a good card. It's a 2/1 snake and landfall, so whenever a land enters your battlefield, landfall triggers. So whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, add 1 mana of any color. So you essentially are gaining mana each time you put mana in. It can help you essentially cheese things into play a little bit quicker. Fantastic card. Got some more stuff. A Relic Axe, another equipment. When it comes into play, you can attach it to a creature you control. Equipped creature gets +1/+1. If it's a warrior, it gets +2/+1 instead. So if you're making a warrior deck, there you go. Lithoform Blight. Enchants has to be a land. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. Enchanted land loses all land types and abilities and has tap to add 1 colorless. And tap, pay 1 life, add 1 mana of any color to your pool. So essentially it turns your card into a City of Brass, which is an old land card that could tap. Every time it tapped, cost you a point of life, and you could add 1 mana of any color. So could be useful on yourself, could just be something you play on your opponent to make them tap and hurt themselves. I'm sure it's got a point. Expedition Diviner, a 3/2 flying merfolk. As long as you control another wizard, has whenever this creature dies, draw a card. Okay. A 4/4 Makindi Ox. Has landfall whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control. Tap target creature an opponent controls. So if you're playing a land every turn, you get to tap some of your opponent's creatures. Deliberate, scry 2, then draw a card. So it's kind of like the opt, except for you go 2 deep. And you can choose one of those two essentially to draw, or chuck them both. Or you can put them both in back on the top in a separate order. Dauntless Survivor. It is a 2 for a 1/1 and enters the battlefield and put a 1/1 counter on target creature. So it could be himself, or it could be something else. Molten Blast. You cast it, choose one. You can either destroy an artifact or deal 2 damage to a creature or a planeswalker. So not a player, but most of the things. And we got a planeswalker. We have Nissa of Shadowed Boughs. A green and black. She has landfall on herself. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, put a loyalty counter on Nissa of the Shadowed Boughs. Alright. For adding 1 to her loyalty count, you can untap target lands you control. You may have it become a 3/3 elemental creature with haste and menace until end of turn. It is still a land. So you can pretty much sneak in some extra land damage. Yeah, end of turn. So it's at the end of your turn, it'll become a land again. So on your opponent's turn, you won't have it there, but if you want to put -5, you may put a creature card with mana value less than or equal to the number of lands you control onto the battlefield from your hand or graveyard with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. So she can essentially just start fetching out from your hand or graveyard. So it has to be from your hand or your graveyard, not your opponent's. So some graveyard cheese cards let you choose your opponent's stuff, but she essentially starts pulling out big cards from your hand or graveyard. Snazzy. Got a Chaldean Pact. Got Thought Coming, which is counterspell, or you can foretell it. Foretell is during your turn, you may pay 2 colorless and exile this card from your hand face down. You can cast it later on for its foretell cost, so essentially you exile this card from your hand, which has multiple points, because A, you can cast it for its foretell cost, which is cheaper than its actual cost, so you need it there, but it'd also be technically out of your hand, decreasing your hand size, as well as making it harder for your opponents to deal with, because it's exiled. They can't make you discard it or anything from there. So, lots of reasons. You got a Draugr Recruiter, 3/3 zombie cleric with Boast. Boast is an ability you can cast when, or activate after the creature is attacked. And for 1 black and 3 colorless, you can return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Your opponent probably won't want you to keep doing that over and over again. So, it's expensive, but you can keep recycling your stuff as long as you can keep on getting in. Scorn Effigy, 3 for a 2/3, but it's also foretell for 0, so you could totally pay 2 and exile it from your hand and then cast it on a later turn. So you also can't cast it on the turn you foretell it. It's also what I forgot to mention. You can't just be like, oh, I exiled it and then cast it, so you can essentially be like, oh, I foretell it for 2 and then immediately cast it for 0. You have to do it on a separate turn, either your opponent's turn or your following turn. Raise the Draugr. Choose 1. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand, or return 2 target creature cards that share a creature type from your graveyard to your hand. So if you're theming your deck around zombies or clerics or artifacts and creatures and scarecrows, you can bring back 2. Warhorn Blast. Creatures you control get +2/+1 till end of turn. We've discussed why those are good. Grim Draugr. The snowflake down there in the bottom is for snow-covered lands. We haven't seen any of those, but it has to be paid by a land that says snow-covered, like a snow land. Like it'll be snow-covered mountain, snow-covered island, all those types of things. It has to be paid with one of those lands in order to activate. But he's also a snow creature, so anything that involves snow would also use him. We got Saroff, the Realm Eater, a 3/3 legendary wolf with rainbow legs. Whenever a permanent an opponent controls is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a 1/1 counter on Saroff, the Realm Eater. That is any permanent. So it could be their lands, their artifacts, enchantments, creatures, planeswalkers, anything. As long as it dies, well, as long as it goes to the graveyard, your wolf gets bigger. At the beginning of your upkeep, if Saroff has one or more +1/+1 counters on it, you may remove all of them. If you do, exile each other non-land permanent with mana value less than or equal to the number of counters removed this way. So essentially, as you put counters on it, during your upkeep, you can remove all of them. You don't get to remove as many as you do, but all of them, to then exile all other non-land permanents. So that includes yours as well, with mana value less than or equal to. So if you had 3 counters on it, you removed all 3, it would get rid of all creatures, artifacts, enchantments, planeswalkers that had a mana cost of 3 or less, other than this wolf itself. The wolf doesn't eat itself. The total mana cost is the total amount of mana it would take to cast it. So this would be 3, as it has 1 green, 1 black, 1 colorless. This would also be 3, as it takes 2 colorless and 1 black. So there you go. Let's go with another one. We've got Provoke the Trolls. Deals 3 damage to any target. If a creature is dealt damage this way, it gets +5/+0 till end of turn. So if your card can take it, it can get bigger. If not, you can kill something smaller with it. Got an Elderfang Disciple. Enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card. So if you're playing in a big game with multiple opponents, they all have to discard a card. Carfell Harbinger. 1/3 zombie wizard that has tap to add 1 blue. Spend this mana only to foretell a card from your hand or cast an instant or sorcery spell. So we went over the foretells. You can use it to help cast a card with foretell, or you can just cast an instant or sorcery with it. Very unusual to get blue mana from, or like a mana elf type creature from something other than green. So if you need to power up your blue, go for it. Funeral Longboat. This is a vehicle. It's a special kind of artifact that has a crew number. You have to tap your creatures. They don't attack when they do so, with power equal to or greater than the number of crew. So if it says 1, you can tap a creature that's 1/1, 2/2, 5/1, anything that it's, as long as it's 1 power or greater, that makes that the creature has the power and toughness down in the bottom right that it would have, so it becomes a 3/3. It's crewed up. You can attack, block, do whatever you want with it. You can do that at any time. It is not the amount of creatures you need to tap. So if it was crew 3, it doesn't mean you need to tap 3 creatures. You need to tap any number of creatures that equal up to 3 power. So you could have 1 big creature crew it. You could have a bunch of small creatures crew it. Any of those types of things. So it's counting power, not amount of creatures. Invoke the Divine is an instant. Destroy target artifact or enchantment, and then you gain 4 life. Pretty simple. We got the World Tree. That's beautiful art. Enters the battlefield, tap. Tap, add 1 green, as long as you control 6 or more lands. Lands you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color. So in addition to whatever they normally could do, they could also tap for 1 mana of any color. Pay 2 of every color, tap and sacrifice the World Tree. Search your library for any number of God cards and put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle. If we find some gods, we'll know what they are. And we could search a bunch of them out. We have Kaya's Onslaught. Target creature gets 1/1, gains double strike. We've talked about double strike, but it gives it essentially first strike as well as a normal attack. So it does 1 round of attack in the first strike round, which is before normal damage, and as well as damage during the normal damage turn. But it does not apply when creatures, quote, fight. We got a Frostpire Arcanist. Costs 1 less to control if you control a giant or a wizard. Not 1 less for each one you control, just if you control. So you can't keep pumping him lower and lower. When it enters the battlefield, search your library for an instant or sorcery with the same name as a card in your graveyard. Reveal it, put it in your hand, and shuffle. So you have to choose a card, an instant or sorcery, in your graveyard, and you can go find another one of them in your deck, put it in your hand. Cool. Glacial Floodplain enters the battlefield, tap. There's a snowland, so you could use that for the snow mana. And it can produce blue or white mana. Simple. Hoggy Mob. God, they're amazing looking. 5/4. They have their boast, which we talked about before, to deal 1 damage to any target, so they can ping off some damage. A Not Void Recluse, 4/2 spider. Pretty much every spider in the game has reach, because spiders. Elderfang Disciple, we've already seen it. And Mammoth Growth. Target creature gets +4/+4 till end of turn. Very useful card. We got Waking the Trolls. We've seen a saga before, so we understand what they do, but first round it will do destroy target land. Second time it'll put target land from a graveyard under the battlefield under your control, so that says a graveyard, so it can be either your graveyard or your opponent's graveyard. So you can destroy their land, then take their land. May be useful, may not, but it can do things. And then finally, choose target opponent. They control fewer lands than you. Create a number of 4/4 green troll warrior creatures with trample equal to the difference. So this is the kind of cards you play where you're either just loading out lands, destroying their lands, or doing both, so that you can have a huge discrepancy between your lands and theirs, and just get a bunch of the troll warriors there with the planks on their head and just overrun them on the next turn. Getting near the end, we got Strixhaven, the School of Mages. We got the Dream Strix. These are illusions. Illusions have a very specific ability where when they become a target of a spell, they die, essentially. So that's any spell would be, say, you could ping it for 1 damage off of like a little fireball thing. That still became the target of a spell. That's including if you cast your own enchantments on it. That's becoming the target of a spell, so be very careful. Do not enchant these creatures on your own. You will kill your own creature. Do not make that mistake. When it dies, Learn. Learn is an ability that was added, I believe, for Strixhaven, where you reveal a lesson card. Some cards are tagged with lessons. They're usually like instants and sorceries, but sometimes other things, I believe. And you get to take it from essentially outside the game and put it in your hand. Very useful if you're looking for very specific cards. It kind of gives you like an option. Or, if you don't do that, you can discard a card to draw a card. In case you don't have any outside game stuff or do anything with that, there's other options. It doesn't make it worthless. Anywho, Wormhole Serpent. You can make target creature can't be blocked this turn by spending a certain amount of mana. It can be itself, it can be one of your opponent's creatures, it can be one of your creatures. Reasons for all of this. Fuming Effigy. Whenever one or more cards leaves your graveyard, Fuming Effigy deals 1 damage to each opponent. So that's if it returns to play from your graveyard. If your whole graveyard gets exiled, that's leaving your graveyard. So 1 point of damage. However, it activates on each ping of it. So if your entire graveyard gets exiled at once, it would only do 1 damage. If, however, like every turn, your opponent's like removing 1 card out of your graveyard, then it's just doing 1 damage over and over and over again. So it doesn't do it by the amount that it's done, it's each instance. So say you remove one of your cards, then you have another spell right after that removes more cards. For each instance, it'll do 1 damage. Keep that in mind. Beaming Defiance. Target creature you control gets 2/2 hexproof till end of turn. Yep. Rise of Extus. Exile target creature, exile up to 1 target instant or sorcery card from a graveyard, and learn. So that wasn't an either or. You do all of those. You exile a creature, then you exile 1 instant or sorcery from a graveyard, and you learn. It doesn't say you may or you can. It says you must. So from a graveyard, if your opponent has no instants or sorceries, you're grabbing one of yours. Keep that in mind. Cram Session. You gain 4 life and then learn. Yeah. Fracture. Destroy target artifact, enchantment, or planeswalker. Fantastic. Pretty much destroy many options. The more options you have, the greater the card becomes, because it encompasses far more of the things your opponents can play. Ooh, we get some fancy art for a Croson Grip. Split second. As long as this spell is on the stack, players can't cast spells or activate abilities that aren't mana abilities. So essentially, it's going to prevent anything else from happening. Split second. So you destroy target artifact or enchantment. By doing the split second, you can't activate anything else at that point. So, like, remember with the demon that could sacrifice your creatures to make itself bigger. If you had something that did that with artifacts or enchantments, and you went to destroy this artifact, and your opponent was like, cool, I'll just sacrifice it to make my creature bigger, if they had that kind of an ability. With a split second, they can't. Nothing else can be played, which also means it's not going to be able to be countered. Pretty useful in that aspect. And it's some snazzy art. So, next pack. Ooh, get some other fancy art again. We got a Defiant Strike with different art. It's +1/+0 till end of turn, and you draw a card. Yeah. Slightly bigger and replaces itself. Not terrible. Kelpie Guide. You can tap it to untap another target permanent you control. So another means not itself, so you can't just stand there tapping and untapping itself over and over again. Or tap and tap target permanent. Activate only if you control 8 or more lands. Yeah. Biblioplex Assistant. Little gargoyle. When he enters the battlefield, put up to 1 target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard on top of your library. So you get to choose the instant or sorcery and you put it on top of your library, not in your hand, so at least you know what you're drawing next turn, or whenever you cast another draw spell. Elemental Masterpiece. Create 2 4/4 blue and red elemental creature tokens. And discard an Elemental Masterpiece, or discard Elemental Masterpiece to create a treasure token. So if you're feeling you're not going to get up to 7 land and you need a treasure token, which is off to the right, a treasure token is essentially a one-time use land that can tap for any color mana. So if you really need that land, bump yourself up. Sometimes it's better than waiting for the 7 for 2 4/4s. Sometimes it's not. It's up to you to decide. Hunt for Specimens. Create a 1/1 black and green pest creature token with when this creature dies, you gain 1 life. It's off there to the right. It's very cute and happy looking. And then you learn afterwards. Snazzy. Reject. Counter target creature or planeswalker spell unless its controller pays 3 colorless. If that spell is countered this way, exile it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. So if they have things that activate when they go into the graveyard, it's going straight to exile. They don't get to activate or have the opportunity to try and bring it back, really. Mascot Interception. Sorcery. The spell costs 3 less to cast if it targets a creature token. So, like if it... the 4/4 elemental creature tokens, if it targeted that, it would cost 1 red instead. Gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature. It gains +2/+0 and gains haste until end of turn. You can do all kinds of shenanigans with stealing other people's creatures. You go beat them down. There was that card where you sacrifice a creature. You can totally sacrifice their creature and fling it at their face, essentially. And then they don't get their creature back at the end of the turn because it's dead. However, it won't go into your graveyard. It goes back into its owner's graveyard. Things always go back to their owners. Keep that in mind. And we get a Crackle with Power. Oof. 3x. 2 red and 3x. Crackle with Power deals 5 times X damage to each of up to X targets. So X will have to be the same. You can't just be like, well, I'm just going to pay for X once. X has to be the same 3 times. So you're going to need a lot of land, but it does 5 times damage to up to X amount of targets. So say you made X 5. It would be 25 damage to up to each of X targets. So you could do 25 damage to 5 different things. You can't target the same thing multiple times either, because it says of up to each of X targets. I believe, again, 95% sure you can't just choose 5 times the same thing. It has to be 5 different. It has to be X different targets. So you can't just choose their face 5 times and do like 200 damage. Got Draconic Intervention. As an additional cost to cast the spell, exile an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard. Take it from your graveyard and put it out of the game. Draconic Intervention deals X damage to each non-dragon creature, so anything that says dragon creature is safe, where X is the exiled card's mana value. If a creature dealt damage this way would die this turn, exile it instead, and then exile this card, so it doesn't even go to your graveyard. You just cast the Draconic Intervention, and then it is gone from the game. Mercurial Transformation. This is a lesson, so these are the things that you can learn. You can hold them outside the game and pull them in. Until end of turn, target non-land permanent loses all abilities and becomes your choice of a blue frog creature with base power and toughness 1/1, or a blue octopus creature with base power toughness 4/4. So essentially, you either want to screw over one of your opponent's permanents. Keep in mind it's a permanent, not necessarily a creature, so you could turn their land into a 1/1 and deal 1 damage and kill their land, or an artifact. Literally any permanent, anything that is on the field that remains there is a permanent, with very few exceptions. Rise of Exodus, we've seen that. Make your mark. Target creature gets 1/1 until end of turn. When that creature dies this turn, create a 3/2 red and white spirit creature token. It's an instant, so it's very easy to put it on something that's going to die. Or hopefully kill something in the process too. Silver Quill Pledge Mage. Magecraft. This ability triggers whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell. Silver Quill Pledge Mage gains your choice of flying or lifelink until end of turn. So if you cast multiple instants or sorceries, you can give them both flying and lifelink until end of turn. Very useful because she only has 1 toughness. And finally, Divide by 0. Return target spell or permanent with mana value 1 or greater to its owner's hand. And then learn. So if it costs 0, you cannot return the spell or permanent. Keep in mind, that means target spell, so anything is a spell when it is being cast. You could totally bounce back anything, an instant to their hand, make them cast it again if they were gonna like win the turn, or if they spent a bunch of mana, say 6 mana for the Rise of Exodus, you bounce it back to their hand, they gotta pay 6 more to cast it again, or they're screwed. So you can kind of sort of counter it a little bit or bounce it. It's got multiple uses. And a Growth Spiral. Draw cards. You may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield with fancy different art. Fantastic. We're going to skip over the Dungeons and Dragons one for the moment. We're going to do Innistrad, Midnight Hunt. We got a Blood Tithe Collector. These are some of the newer sets. Flying, when Blood Tithe Collector enters the battlefield, if an opponent lost life this turn, each opponent discards a card. So, say you attacked before you cast this card, which is why you like to also cast things on the second main phase afterwards. You cast this card after you dealt a little bit of damage, comes into play, your opponents have to discard a card. Pretty simple. Component Collector. If it is neither day nor night, it becomes day as Component Collector enters the battlefield. Whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, you may tap or untap target non-land permanent. Day and night are when it becomes day, if it becomes day or night, or if a day-bound permanent enters the battlefield, track day or night for the rest of the game. As it becomes day, transform all night-bound permanents. If a player casts no spells during their own turn, it becomes night next turn. And I believe, yeah, with night, if it's night, they've just come into the battlefield in their night-bound state, which are mostly like werewolves and stuff. And then if it's night, if a player casts at least 2 spells, keep in mind again, spells are anything other than land, so you could cast, it's not like, oh, you need to cast 2 sorceries or 2 instants. As long as you cast 2 things from your hand, it will become day the next turn. Sometimes you want that to happen, sometimes you want to stop your opponent from making that happen. You have to play by ear. Eccentric Farmer. That's horrifying. 2/3. When Eccentric Farmer enters the battlefield, mill 3 cards, then you may return a land card from your graveyard to your hand. So you take the top 3 cards of your library, put them into your graveyard, and then you can return a land card from your graveyard to your hand. Possibly from a card you milled, possibly from a land you already had in there. Lots of choices. Duress. Target opponent reveals their hand, so you do get to see their entire hand of cards. You choose a non-creature, non-land card from it. So anything that doesn't say creature and doesn't say land is fair game. So instants, sorceries, planeswalkers, enchantments, artifacts, and you make them discard it. In the Arena app, it will show you the opponent's cards that you have revealed, so you can look them over anytime you want to. You don't have to just memorize it before they get their hand back. Novice Occultist. When they die, you draw a card and you lose a life. Straightforward. Burn the Accursed. Burn the Accursed. Deals 5 damage to target creature and 2 damage to that creature's controller. If that creature would die this turn, exile it instead. Expensive burn spell. You got an Enduring Angel, which is fancy. It's another mythic. It is 5 mana to cast. It is flying, it has double strike, and you have hexproof. So you yourself as a player, so things that would target you, such as the duress, would not be able to be cast, or would just fizzle essentially. If your life total would be reduced to 0 or less, instead transform Enduring Angel and your life total becomes 3. Then, if Enduring Angel didn't transform this way, you lose the game. Interesting. So, essentially, if you die, this creature flips over to its backside and becomes the Angelic Enforcer. As flying, you have hexproof, so you still have hexproof, and Angelic Enforcer's power and toughness are each equal to your life total. Whenever Angelic Enforcer attacks, double your life total. Good God. So, if your opponent can't essentially kill you twice in one turn, your life total becomes 3, essentially the power or toughness of the angel. And then the angel becomes 3/3 again, except for each time it attacks. Not each time it deals damage to your opponent. Each time you declare an attack with it, you double your life total. So that can get exponentially awful really quick. Go from 3 to 6 to 12 to 24, 48, and so on, not including if you have a bunch of other life-gaining spells in the deck. Wonderful card. Not super expensive, not super unexpensive. But I think that's a pretty snazzy card. Got a Diregraph Rebirth. The spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature that died this turn. So each creature, not just if one creature or more. Each creature that died this turn makes this cost 1 less. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and then it also has flashback. Flashback is if this card is in your graveyard, you can cast it for its flashback cost. Keep in mind that will also still get reduced when creatures die. So you can still be 1 green, 1 black, and to return another creature, but once you cast it from your graveyard with flashback, it gets exiled, so you can't just keep doing it over and over and over again. Firmament Sage. It makes it day or night when it comes into play, and whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, you draw a card. So each time the day-night cycle flips, you get a free card. And it doesn't say may, so you have to draw the card. We've already seen Duress, we've seen the Novice Occultist, we've got a Devious Cover-Up. Counter target spell. If that spell is countered this way, exile it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. You may shuffle up to 4 target cards from your graveyard into your library. You don't have to choose 4, but you can choose up to 4 and put them back in your library. Very nice. Electric Revelation. As an additional cost to cast this spell, discard a card. So you discard 1 card, and you get to draw 2, and it also has flashback. And we have a Denik, the Pious Apprentice. Legendary creature, human soldier. Lifelink cards in graveyards can't be targets of spells or abilities, so if you're afraid of people doing graveyard shenanigans, they just can't. And Disturb is one of the newer abilities. You can essentially cast it on its transform side from your graveyard for its disturbed cost, so kind of like flashback, except for it's usually on permanence and it flips over to its transformation. So from your graveyard you would cast Denik, the Pious Apparition. He's a 3/2 flying spirit soldier. Whenever 1 or more creature cards are put into graveyards from anywhere, investigate. Investigate makes a clue, little artifact that you have to pay 2 and sacrifice it to draw a card, so that's cool. This ability triggers only once each turn. Good to know. If Denik Pious Apparition would be put into a graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. So if it essentially dies again, it goes away. I can see its uses. Alrighty, we have the Mysterious Tome. 2 and tap to draw a card, transform the Mysterious Tome into a Chilling Chronicle. 1, tap target non-land permanent and transform the Chilling Chronicle back and forth. So it just keeps flipping back and forth and back and forth and back and forth to draw cards and tap stuff. It's got uses. I can see how that'd be useful. Delver of Secrets. At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. You may then reveal that card, so your opponent knows what it is. If an instant or sorcery card is revealed this way, then you get to transform your Delver of Secrets. And the Delver of Secrets becomes a 3/2 human flying insect. So for 1 mana, you can essentially have a 3/2 flyer, which is very much reminiscent of the Fly. Fancy little art. We have a Harvesttide Sentry, a 3/1 Coven. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you control 3 or more creatures with different powers. Harvesttide Sentry can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less this turn, so they have to throw something large at this creature in order to be able to block, but you have to have 3 different creatures with different powers. Those 3 creatures don't have to be attacking, you just have to have them on the field. Homestead Courage. 1/1 counter on target creature you control, gains vigilance till end of turn with flashback. Pretty simple. Raise the effigy. Choose 1, destroy an artifact, or target creature gets 2/2. Also very obvious. Harvesttide Infiltrator. It has daybound and nightbound. That's with the day and night cycle, so during the daytime it's a 3/2 human werewolf. At night it's a 4/4 trampling werewolf. We've got the Bird Admirer. It's also a werewolf, so in the daytime it's a 1/4 reach, and at night it's a 3/5 reach. So if your opponent's playing werewolves, you obviously don't want it to be night. Memory Deluge. Look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast the spell. Put 2 of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So first time it'll be 4 cards, and the second time it'll be 7 cards if you cast it for its flashback. Pretty nifty. We're on to the Crimson Vow, the newest set. We get a Griffwing Cavalry. Flying and Training. Training, whenever this creature attacks with another creature with greater power, put a +1/+1 creature counter on this creature. So as you attack with bigger creatures alongside this creature, your creature gets bigger to match its training partner. Whenever Griffwing Cavalry attacks, you may pay 1 white, 1 colorless. If you do, target attacking creature without flying also gains flying, so it makes it easier to get your training partner in the air. Blood Hypnotist. Can't block. It's a vampire. Whenever you sacrifice 1 or more blood tokens, target creature can't block this turn. This ability triggers only once each turn. Siphon Essence. Counter target spell, or counter target creature or planeswalker spell. So it has to be a creature or a planeswalker. And create a blood token. So there's our blood tokens over there. You can pay 1 to tap and discard a card, and sacrifice its artifact to draw a card. And whenever you sacrifice it. But keep in mind, that just means whenever you sacrifice it. It doesn't mean you have to sacrifice it to its own ability. If you have another way to sacrifice an artifact, it's still sacrificing a blood token. It would still work. Daybreak Combatants. Haste. When Daybreak Combatants enter the battlefield, target creature gets 2/2/0. Yeah. Undying Malice. Until end of turn, target creature gains when this creature dies. Return it to the owner's battlefield tapped under its owner's control with a 1/1 counter on it. So you put it on your creature when you think you're going to die. When it's about to die, it gets bigger when it comes back. It's great. Grisly Ritual. Destroy target creature or planeswalker and create 2 blood tokens. Yeah, that's some Full Metal Alchemist shit right there. And we got Ureth, the Tormented Prophet. Legendary human wizard. If you would draw a card, exile the top 2 cards of your library instead. You may play those cards this turn. Fair enough. But keep in mind, you can only play them this turn, so you get the top 2 cards, and if you don't play them this turn, you don't get to play them next turn. That's what the next one is. We got an Infestation Expert. When Infestation Expert enters the battlefield or attacks, create a 1/1 green insect creature token. Or it creates 2. Whenever infested werewolf. Yeah, gets bigger and just shoots out butterflies, apparently. Twin Blade Geist, double strike, and Disturb. Enchanted creature has double strike. If Twin Blade Invocation we put in the graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. Essentially, you get like a second chance with them, with the Disturb stuff, and then they just exile out. There's ways to get around it, but that's mostly what they're designed to do. Fear of Death. Enchant creature. When Fear of Death enters the battlefield, mill 2 cards. Enchant creature gets -X/-0, where X is the number of cards in your graveyard, so could be huge at the end of the game if you needed, or if you just need to mill some cards, or a little bit of both. Courier Bat. Flying. When Courier Bat enters the battlefield, if you gain life this turn, return up to 1 target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Fantastic. Voldaren Epicure. When they enter the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each opponent, and you create a blood token. It's pretty good for 1/1. Yeah. Snazzy card. Gluttonous Guest. When Gluttonous Guest enters the battlefield, create a blood token. Whenever you sacrifice a blood token, you gain a life. Wedding Invitation. When Wedding Invitation enters the battlefield, you get to draw a card. Sacrifice Wedding Invitation. Target creature can't be blocked this turn. If it's a vampire, it also gains lifelink until end of turn. It's very nice. It's good for your vampires when you need to gain life to do other things. Curse of Hospitality. An aura curse. Enchant player. These are things you usually want to cast on your opponent. Creatures attacking enchanted player have trample, so anything that attacks the player that is cursed has trample. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to enchanted player, that player exiles the top card of their library. Until end of turn, that creature's controller may play that card, and they may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast that spell. Yep. So essentially, you get in, all your creatures gain trample when you attack your opponent. You get in for each damage. That player exiles the top card of the library. So for each creature, if you have it's not for the damage, just for each creature that gets through and deals 1 point of damage at least, they exile the top card of their library, and you would get to play it until end of turn. And you can spend your mana as though it were any color to cast it, so them having different color decks than you isn't going to stop it. It's pretty snazzy. Vary amount just to give your creatures trample, but you also get to then play out of your opponent's deck. I think that's pretty snazzy. Get a Fleeting Spirit. Exile 3 cards from your graveyard. Fleeting Spirit gains first strike till end of turn, or discard a card. And exile Fleeting Spirit. Return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. Why would you want to do that? Because, say, your opponent targets it with a bunch of damage, or it's about to die, or you need to block but you don't want it to die. You can block, ditch a card, bounce it out. Technically, it didn't take any damage that turn. Lots of shenanigans. Cloaked Cadet has the training, so it can get bigger and bigger. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on 1 or more humans you control, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. Fear of Death. Enchanted. Yeah, we've seen that one. Blood Fountain. Enters the battlefield, create a blood token. Sacrifice Blood Fountain, return 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. End the Festivities. End the Festivities deals 1 damage to each opponent and each creature and each planeswalker they control. Yeah, so it's just doing damage to everything. Fearful Villager. It's a werewolf. It's bigger as a werewolf. Does werewolfy things. Weaver of Blossoms. At daytime it adds 1 mana of any color. And at nighttime it adds 2 mana of any one color. And we get a Dream Shackle Geist. The beginning of combat on your turn, choose up to 1. Tap a creature, or target creature doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. So you could theoretically tap something down or keep something tapped forever. And keep in mind, it's just at the beginning of combat. It doesn't mean this creature needs to attack in order to activate that ability. It just does it. Important distinctions. Let's see here, we've got Sigarda's Imprisonment. Enchanted creature can't attack or block. And exile enchanted creature to create a blood token. So, it essentially, you've just cast it on one of your opponent's creatures, and eventually you'll just be able to exile it. But in the meantime, they won't be able to attack or block, so it's kind of like the pacifism we had when we were doing it before. We have a Sanctify, destroy target artifact enchantment, you gain 3 life. A Saroff Entomber, discard a creature card to draw a card. Okay. Sporeback Wolf, kind of gross. As long as it's your turn, it gets +2 or +0/+2. So on your turn, it's a 2/4. Not bad. Aim for the head. Choose 1 exile target zombie, or target opponent exiles 2 cards from their hand. So instead of discarding it to the graveyard, they just straight to the graveyard. And Whispering Wizard. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. This ability triggers only once each turn. And a winged portent. Cleave. You may cast the spell for its cleave cost if you do remove the words in square brackets. Draw a card for each creature, quote, with flying you control. So if you cast the cleave cost, you just draw a card for each creature you control. Or you just put in a flying deck and draw a whole bunch of cards for 3 mana. Last of the Crimson Vow. And an extra wild card. We've got Frenzied Devils. Hastes. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, Frenzied Devils get +2/+2 until end of turn. Most common non-creature spells are going to be your sorceries and instants, but they're also planeswalkers. They're also enchantments. They're also artifacts. Anything that doesn't have the word creature. You got a Skull Scab. Exploit. When this creature exploit is whenever the creature enters the battlefield, you can sacrifice a creature. Whenever a creature you control exploits a non-token creature, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. So, there you go. You can essentially kill off one of your smaller creatures, or a creature that has a on death effect to make a 2/2 zombie, but it also affects every creature that exploits a non-token creature on your side that you control. Courier Bet, we've already seen. Bloody Betrayal, gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untap that creature, it gains haste, and you create a blood token. We've seen similar gain control effects. Abrade, choose one, either deal 3 damage to a creature. 3 damage is a nice realm, or destroy an artifact. That is a fantastic card. Ceremonial Knife, equipped creature gets +1/+0 and has whenever this creature deals combat damage, create a blood token. Combat damage, not combat damage to a player, so if you attack and deal any damage, you're gaining a blood token. And we've got Path of Peril. Destroy all creatures with mana value 2 or less, or destroy all creatures with a cleave. Alright, so we're on to our final packs, the Forgotten Realms. Let's do this. We got the Grim Wanderer. Flesh and a tragic backstory. Cast a spell only if a creature died this turn. A Goblin Warlock. Alright. Didn't expect him to be a goblin, but sure. We got the Barbarian class. Enchantment in a class. Gain the next ability is a sorcery to add its level up when you cast it. If you would roll 1 or more dice, instead roll that many dice +1 and ignore the lowest roll. Whenever you roll, and then you can level them up as sorceries. So you can pay 1 red and 1 colorless to make it level 2, and you have to go in order. You can't just go straight to level 3. Whenever you roll 1 or more dice, target creature you control gets +2/+0 and gains menace. And from there you can get a level 3 where all your creatures have haste. You also keep all abilities before. You don't just give up the first one to get to level 2. You have everything below it as well. Circle of the Moon Druid, bear form. As long as it's your turn, Circle of the Moon Druid is a bear with base power and toughness 4 and 2. It loses all other creature types, so its power and toughness flips each turn. So it becomes a good attacker and then a good blocker. Deadly Dispute is an additional cast to cast a spell. Sacrifice an artifact or a creature. Draw 2 cards and create a treasure. Sweet. You hear something on watch. Choose one. Rouse the party. Creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. That's all creatures. Or set off traps. The spell deals 5 damage to target attacking creature. So, it's good on both attack and defense. Nice card. Scion of Stygia, Tiefling Shaman. Cone of Cold. When Scion of Stygia enters the battlefield, choose target creature an opponent controls, and then roll the d20. So you must choose before you roll. On a 1 to 9, you tap that creature, or on 10 to 20, tap that creature, and it doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. So there's your dice rolls. Works with the Barbarian class. Fate's Reversal. Return up to 1 target creature card from your graveyard to your hand and venture into the dungeon. So you can choose a dungeon and go into it, or move further into it. Gives you a little extra bonuses. And we have a Long Rest. Return X target cards with different mana values from your graveyard to your hand. If 8 or more cards were returned to your hand this way, your life total becomes equal to your starting life total. Exile Long Rest. There you go. So it can also be a good life gain. 2 more to go. We've got Magic Missiles. This spell cannot be countered, and it deals 3 damage divided as you choose among 1, 2, or 3 targets. So you can deal 3 damage to one target, 2 to one, and 1 to another, or 1 to 3 different targets. We've got a Drider. Whenever a Drider deals combat damage to a player, you create a 2/1 Black Spider. We've got a Ranger's Hawk. Tap another untapped creature you control to venture into the dungeon. Activate only as a sorcery, so if you're doing a dungeon-y deck, you can maneuver through relatively quickly. A Delver's Torch. Equipped creature gets +1/+1. Whenever equipped creature attacks, venture into the dungeon. Underdark Basilisk. 1/2 Death Touch. Beautiful. Dragonfire. There's an additional cost to cast this spell. You may, so you don't have to, reveal a dragon card from your hand or choose a dragon you control. Dragon's Fire deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker. If you revealed a dragon card or chose a dragon as you cast this spell, Dragon Fire deals damage equal to the power of that card or creature instead. So you're either dealing 3 damage, or if you got a big dragon in your hand or on the field, you can do a boatload more damage, because dragons usually have a bunch of power. That's also why you can't do it to a player. Steadfast Paladin, 2/2 lifelink. Wonderful. Wizard Spellbook. Artifact. Exile target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard. Roll a d20 and activate only as a sorcery. On 1 to 9, copy that card, and you may cast that copy. On 10 to 19, copy that card. You may cast that copy by paying 1 rather than paying its mana cost. And on a 20, copy each card exiled with Wizard Spellbook. You may cast any number of those copies without paying their mana cost. So if you've exiled a bunch of cards with it, you could be casting a bunch of them. You could be casting a bunch of them. And the last pack. We've got a Goblin Morningstar. Equipped creature gets +1/+0 and has trample. Equip 1 red, 1 colorless. When Goblin Morningstar enters the battlefield, roll a d20. On 1 to 9, create a 1/1 red goblin. On a 10 to 20, create a 1/1 red goblin token and attach the Goblin Morningstar to it. So, there you go. You can have a 2 for a 2/1 trampling goblin. Got Barrowin of Clan Undur. When Barrowin enters the battlefield, venture into the dungeon. Whenever Barrowin attacks, return up to 1 creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield if you've completed a dungeon. So if you completed a dungeon, each time Barrowin attacks, you can just keep chugging things back. Very great, especially if you find a way to give Barrowin some form of evasion. Fate's Reversal. Return up to 1 target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Find the cursed idol. You either smash it, destroy an artifact, destroy an enchantment, or create a treasure. And venture. You got a Valor Singer, a Tiefling Bard. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Keep in mind that means the creature that the Valor Singer doesn't necessarily have to attack in order for that to happen. It just happens during combat. Find the Path, enchant land. When Find the Path enters the battlefield, venture into the dungeon. Enchanted land has tap to add 2 green mana. And the Armory Veteran, an Orc Warrior. Armory Veteran, as long as he's equipped, has Menace. Reasonable equipment. It's bonuses. And our last final card is Meteor Swarm. Meteor Swarm deals 8 damage divided as you choose among X target creatures and or planeswalkers. So it's going to do 8 damage, but each time you play X, you can choose another creature or a different planeswalker to try and kill them all off. Not bad. Good at killing off lots of big things, especially if you have a bunch of mana. But we've already gone well over our allotted time, but I thought this would be some fun to do together. I had fun opening up some packs. It kind of brings back some nostalgia. Hopefully it kind of helped explain some of the different abilities that are existing in Magic as it is now, as well as some of the older cards. I did my best to explain as needed. I'm sure a lot of you already know this, but sometimes we all just need a little refresher, or if we're new to things, it's hard to always find a little tutorial of stuff out there, so. Hope you all enjoyed the packs, the different cards, going over them, any ability explanations. We got all those codes free. The link is in the description down below, and we'll actually play some games when I see you all again in the next adventure. Bye for now.